Stratosphere in our EMEA region. So sorry if you're interrupted via the stream for our part one of the event. That will still be available via recording, so don't worry. All of that great content you can still consume on demand when you're ready. This is the second half of the day, which we're so excited to start it off with one of our topics that we can't ever seem to not talk about, which is organizational change management, and some of our top global colleagues that will talk through some best practices and most importantly, some deliverables. So real quick, some event logistics. No matter where you're watching, we are able to see your comments and questions. So please feel free to make sure that you comment in the chat section or the comment section, wherever you're watching. We'll address all of your great questions and engage with the audience. You know, our OCM specialists love the engagement. So that's something that that we can look at and make sure that we engage in that conversation. So with that, I am going to pass it over to the experts, and thank you so much for joining today. So with that, Donia and Nate, take it away.
All right. Hi, everybody, and welcome back. If you did join us earlier, I'm just going to do a quick re-intro and start the session over again. My name is Donia, and I'm really excited to be here today because this is our first digital stratosphere for the EMEA region for third stage consulting. I'm here today in the capacity of the change management and learning enablement lead for third stage consulting for this region. I've done transformation projects across the world in multiple industries, most recently in the HR space, which is quite of interest. But of course, I also have banking, insurance, telecommunications, and IT experience. I'm joined today by my colleague, who is our practice lead in Colorado. He's the practice lead for change management for the US region. And I'm going to hand over to Nate to introduce himself.
Thanks, Tanya. Hi, this is Nate Strohart with Third Stage Consulting, and I've spent most of my career, over 20 years, in digital transformation, software selection, and change management. And really excited to talk to you today about some of our change management projects that we've been engaged in the last year. We've huge uptick in clients requesting change management services, and have really seen not only a huge uptick in the desire to have these change management initiatives, but also in the size that we are seeing from our clients, anywhere from clients all the way to 30-person organizations. So we're really excited today to talk to you about these change management deliverables, which are the same no matter what the size of the client. I want to give you some examples of the not only the deliverables, but some examples of what we've seen with our clients and some of the trends that we've seen throughout the last year on some of our projects. So I'll turn it back over to you, Danya, and we'll get started.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Nate. And I just want to really also reach out to the audience to say, you know, we would like to know what kind of deliverables you do as well, and just share with us, give us some feedback about what we're saying. We want to make it interactive. And I did mention it in our earlier session. I'm just going to say it again, that we specifically selected this topic because we believe there's been requests for it. And I've also heard it when we go present to clients, when we meet with clients, they say, what exactly do you do for change management? What are the deliverables? And sometimes it's really good to go to the foundation, to the core of this offering and share it with you. We're going to keep it simple. We're going to look at 3 elements. We're going to look at what the deliverable actually is, why we do it, and how it's done, with sharing of some stories, some case studies, some examples along the way. So I know we've only got probably now like 40 minutes. Let's get right into it.
While you're pulling it up, Danya, wanted to just encourage that you make this as interactive as possible so we can see your feedback and your questions coming up on the side here. So if there's anything that we're discussing today, if there's anything that doesn't make sense, if you have questions about what we're talking about, or you'd like us to dig a little deeper into any of these subjects, please let us know. We'll make this as interactive as possible, and really want to not only present to you, but really answer your questions and give you a good idea of what we're seeing out in the market.
Thank you, Nate. And I really want to just make sure that the presentation is up. Can you see it?
Yes, looks great.
Wonderful news. Okay, so let's jump right in. As I said, we're focusing on 5 key deliverables today: the organizational readiness assessment, the communications plan, change impact plan, training plan, and very important, KPIs and metrics. Let's start with the organizational readiness assessment. This is a document. So if we look at what it is, it's a document that gets delivered. But this is like, I want to say, the meat of everything. It encapsulates the vision of what change is going to happen. So it's got some key elements such as the vision statement that comes out of a stakeholder assessment, stakeholder workshops that Nate will be taking you through. It looks at why the change is being done. So as I mentioned, what change is being done, why the change is being done, who are some of the key high-level stakeholders, what are some of the challenges and risks that we foresee, what are the strengths that we know up front, what are the critical success factors, how are we going to measure the success, and what support do we need? For example, very critically, you might need specific leadership support, or if you are part of a bigger group, you might be one of the subsidiaries or a smaller unit and you need support from group as well. What this also contains is the approach to change management and which team players are you looking at including. When I look at the why, I don't usually do this, but I'd really like just to read the statement here because I really think it explains it very well. It is to provide and agree upon a clear understanding throughout the organization of where we stand now, where we are heading, how ready we are to get there, and who and what needs to happen to increase the odds of success. So this is really about establishing a common understanding amongst everybody that it's involved, especially the team players, the people that are involved in the development and the execution and involved in making the change a success. Also, the outputs from the readiness document will be used in the further documentation or assessments that we will discuss with you down the line. I will probably want to come back and share 1 or 2 stories, but I will hand over to Nate to speak about the how this is done first.
Great. Okay, thanks. I think just to reiterate, and then we'll jump into the how, but this is really, the organizational readiness assessment is really sort of the kickoff. This is really to sit down and to look at an organization and say, here's where you want to be, here's where you are, here's where you want to be, and here's how the technology will support you to get. When we create these deliverables and when we go through this phase of a change management initiative, it's really sitting down and it's meeting with the organization, starting with the executives, really sitting down and saying, where are you now? Where do you want to be in a year and 3 years from now? Technology help you to get to where you want to be, and what do you want to get out of this initiative? It's really sitting down and saying, okay, what do you consider success? What do you consider coming out of this initiative? What do you consider the main things that are needed to get you to where you want to be? We spend time in workshops with both the end users, the executives. We also conduct surveys and really try and get a feel for how ready the organization is. Is it an organization that's very tech savvy? Is the change going more of a change in how they do business, or is it going to be a monumental change? Is there going to be a paradigm shift? Are we going from, I think I heard one of our clients mention the other day, they said, we're going literally from the equivalent of a rotary phone to a smartphone. We are so behind in our technology, and what we're going and what we're implementing here and where we're going is a monumental leap. That gives us an idea of how much change the organization is going to see. So basically the how and the why and what we get out of this this deliverable is to really, here's where you are, here's where you want to be, here's how ready you are for this change, and these are the areas that we need to focus on the most to successfully implement this change.
Yeah, and I wonder if we might be able to look at this question. I think it's a great one, and I actually have no idea what the answer is, from a user on LinkedIn. So they asked, what percent of transformation programs prepare an organizational readiness document? And I'll answer first and say, not enough, right?
You know, and I think this is a great question, and you know, I think it's really I guess it really you know, kind of give you that on the fence answer, but I would say that not enough, and it's probably not taken into enough detail. It's not given enough emphasis, and it's not really sat down and formalized. And I'll go with the great example, and it always starts with the executive visioning session. We when we kick off these change management initiatives, we sit and we say, where is it that you are and where is it that you want to be? Without a doubt, every time we go into these sessions, the executives will say, we know where we are, we know where we want to be, we're all in alignment. And then you send out a questionnaire ahead of time saying, what will the technology give you, where do you want to be, and where are you going to go? If you send out 10, you're likely to get 8 different answers out of the 10. So I would say that while people a lot of times finish this step, they prepare an org readiness document. It's really not just preparing the document, but it's going through the exercise. It's really sitting down and saying, fine, let's make sure that even though we all think we're aligned, let's make sure that we're all going to discuss this and really come to an alignment as an executive team, and then take that vision and spread that vision throughout the organization so that everyone really knows, here's where we're going, here's what the change is going to involve, and here's how we're going to get there.
Yeah, thanks, Nathan. I just wanted to add to that, specifically picking up where you say, you know, sometimes it is done, but what I have seen is about the thoroughness and the effectiveness of it. So sometimes there's sections such as the vision, or, you know, I have seen something called a vision document, or, you know, that picks, or some slides, I wanted to say, like a couple of slides that highlights the vision. But I've also seen the real thorough details behind the scenes that can happen. So real thorough list of questions. So what is the scope of this? Who will be impacted? What is the level of change per area? What is the perception of the change per area? How will you meet, you know, success? How will you get to the benefits? So as my colleagues have said, it's probably not done enough, and more often not done thoroughly enough.
Thanks for that great question. I'll let you keep going on the presentation, and then we'll pull up a few more of these questions. We'd love to know, just for the audience, where you're joining us from today. I know a few of you are already kind of used to that question and already answering it from our live streams, but it looks like we have some users from Botswana. We've got some from India, and then Iran as well. So all great global audience. So pop those questions in the chat, and we'll have Donia and Nate address them.
All right. Thank you so much, Carla. Can you see my screen?
We can, yes.
Okay, great. So we'll move on. So coming out of this, the vision document, if it is done properly and thoroughly, very likely you will get an idea of the communication, the key messages, and basically the gaps in the understanding, and what are the key messages to keep everybody engaged and to distribute the communication, to distribute the information. What is very key to highlight about the communication plan is that it should have the foresight of not just looking at the communication for the current engagement, but the ongoing communication post go live. I'm sure many of you that have been involved in a change, either from the user side, like from the front end or the back, that you'll see something goes live and there's a communication to say congrats, we're live, and then it's kind of silent. You don't know how the change is progressing, how effective it is. So I really want to highlight that it's important to think of what you're going to do post go live until you've reached the stability that you set out to upfront. Another very important element to highlight in what we do with the comms plan is that it's not a one size fits all. It's not just one emailer or one newsletter that goes out. Deep thought and consideration needs to be given to the different areas, the different stakeholders, the type of roles. It could even be based on geographies that might require different type of information, and that there's multiple ways of disseminating that information as well, different mechanisms to use. And the communication plan is really to build the initial understanding of the project, but it will evolve. So those messages continuously need to be revisited as you're progressing through the transformation initiative. So that's a bit about what the deliverable is. Why it's done is really, as I said up front, to have an effective way to get everybody engaged and to have the correct information sent out to ensure that there's alignment and understanding. I will hand over to Nate here because I can go on and on. So Nate, over to you to discuss a bit more on the how we do it.
Okay, this is great, and we're actually this is a great time to be presenting this because we're working with the client this week on their communications plan. So we have a lot of real relevant examples that we've been working on this week. But plan, when we talk about the how, it's first of all talking about the audience. Who is the audience that you hope to reach, and how, what is their what is the key message that you want to communicate? And throughout the initiative, the communication is going to be different. It's going to be different before you start the project, during the project, go live, and post go live. So we want to first of all say, who's the audience? Who are we trying to reach? What are we going to be communicating throughout the different phases of the project? And then really what channels that we're going to use. We have a lot of manufacturing clients. A lot of the employees at our clients are on the shop floor, so they're not using a lot of email. They're a lot more interactive face-to-face communications. That's going to be different than the executive suite, who's going to be each other most often through email, through Zoom calls, and through conference calls. So you really want to sit down and say, how are we going to communicate to these individuals? And again, how is that going to change throughout the project? As we're working on these different change phases, say, how has it been done in the past? How are we going to do it? And then really sit down and say, what do we need to change? What do we need to put in place to get the communication out there? This is often, for companies, again, kind of going back to a point we made earlier, for organizations that have a good communication plan in place, this is really just sitting down and more formalizing how we're going to do this throughout this change initiative. So this, out of all the deliverables, is one of those that it's really not only creating this plan, but it's really confirming, hey, how are you going to change, and putting a lot of detail around just exactly what this plan looks like.
Absolutely. Great stuff, guys. Do you mind if we jump into a few questions here from the audience? Excellent.
Yep,
well, thank you again for all these great questions. Again, you have my full commitment that we will get to them all, whether it is live here or after in the comments, we'll address them. So this is a great one from Ghassan. Again, he's on our CIO panel, so feel free to join us later this afternoon. Great insight from him always. But what if a readiness document says that a lot of work needs to happen before jumping into a digital transformation project? How long can a client wait? And what if they refuse to do all the prerequisites?
Well, I think this is a great question, and we're gonna hit a little bit on this later on in our presentation. But it's never there's. I would say that with all of this, it's never too late to start. And when you say how long can a client wait, well, I think the key is that it's really important to get started. So if you don't have, if they refuse to do all the prerequisites, if they don't have the time, or they don't see the importance, it's still important to get something started. So when we talk about this readiness document, while we might not be putting a lot of formality around it, I think that the key is that it's something that you just need to jump into. So really, I like to refer to it as, if you don't know what your starting point is, and if you skip this step, how do you know what you need to do to get to where you're going? If you don't know where you are now, you're never going to be able to know what the steps are to get you to where you want to go, just because you don't know where you are.
Absolutely. And then I'll bring up this one too, and maybe we'll start with you, Donia, on this piece of it, and get your insight. I know your guys are chomping at the bit to talk. All our OCMs are, and I feel that way too. But do you ever find a challenge to get the right timing in the communication plans? Too early, people ignore it as irrelevant, but needs to give the audience enough warning of what's coming and how they're going to be impacted. So can you speak to that a little bit, Donia?
Yes, I can. Thank you, Kyla. Doing all of this in reality is challenging, because the world is obviously moving fast. There's a lot of risks that might come up. So, of course, there are challenges that come up. And so, sometimes there's a feel that the timing is never right. But the important thing is that regardless of the challenges, it needs to be done. You might not, if you keep on waiting and saying the time is not right, nothing will go out. So, Carla, if you can please just pull up the rest of the question as well. I know I'm tackling the first part of it. So my answer to that is, even if there are challenges, it is very important to get the communication out there. And just to highlight that we spoke about multiple channels. And you're right. Some people don't have time to read an email, or an email is not the best way, for example, for some people. So try and be consistent with the messaging, get it out there. For example, I'll just give you something really practical, is if you have all of the leadership aligned, a simple thing is to request that in all the team meetings, they just update all the employees in the area about what's happening, where we are, and some of the key challenges. It could literally be as simple as that, to tackle the challenges of the timing and holding off because of risks. I hope I answered the question correct, the question that was asked. Unfortunately, I cannot see the questions while I'm screen sharing. So if I've missed anything, please let me know, Kyla.
No worries. We have some great questions coming in, but let's keep going on your hows here, and then we'll jump back in. So keep popping those in the chat. We're watching them.
Thank you so much, Kyla, and thank you everybody for your engagement. We're going to next talk about the change impact plan. And when we started off, we said the change readiness is really the meat. It has all the information. And between Nate and I, we agreed that change impact plan is probably the heart of everything, because this is where you really start to get into the details of the change impact that's happening. And what's very important to highlight here is that this is all the types of change. You bring in, if there's going to be a process change or a role change, it's not just the items relating to the technology. And really go through every change one by one, looking at the degree of impact of the change, which groups it's going to affect, what's the perception of the change by those groups, and then coming out of that is what are the action plans that are going to be put into place. And those actions can feed into your change management plan or back into your communications plan. And then you can also create a heat map where you look at what are the top changes and what are the top priorities. I just want to make sure I've told you everything here. So, and what some people ask about a stakeholder assessment. Often in the work we do, we include the stakeholder assessment as part of the change impact. And as I said, mapping out what changes are affecting which groups. So this is really done to be able to track the details of the changes and to know which groups it's going to impact, which geographies it's going to impact, and to know what the types of changes are and that they are all being tackled. Nate, over to you to talk a bit on the how this is all done.
Yeah, so this is really, again, kind of the meat of it, and this is really kind of the most challenging part of most of the change impact initiatives that we undertake. And this is really when we sit down, this is spending a lot of time with the executives and the end users to sit down and not so much focus on what their job is today. That's very important to say, how are you doing it today? But how are you doing it today? How are you going to be doing how are you going to be conducting business in the future, and what that change is. It's really sitting down and finding out, what are tracking all the changes. So that sometimes it's as little as we're going to be calling fields different names. We're going to be tracking things differently, all the way through to the new technology will change the way our organization is structured. People are doing their jobs. The different work streams will be divvying the work up differently. So it's really sitting down and saying, what are those challenges? What are the what are we what are the big ones? What are the small ones? Keeping track of all of them, and really, while everything's important, let's focus on the top change impacts. Let's address those, and let's really make sure that we have a good assessment of what are our opportunities, what are our challenges, what are our strengths, and what are our weaknesses. Are we ready for this change? Is your impact? Do we need to train differently? Do we need to put different skill sets into our employees? Or is this something that it's just going to be, I turn on a screen tomorrow morning, it looks a little bit different, I call things a little bit different within the system, and it's really not going to be much of a change. So it's sitting down and just getting a really clear assessment on where we are, where we're going to be, and how ready we are for the impact that's going to happen with the new initiative.
Excellent stuff, guys. We obviously have more questions. So I'm going to read this one. It's from one of our viewers on YouTube. So thank you so much for watching. Sometimes the management requires plans with timelines when actual readiness is not yet established. How can you tackle this situation and convince management to focus on the readiness first?
Oh, that's a great question. I think it's I think it's just probably the best way that I would answer that is just to sit down and really clearly lay out what the initiative is, have a good plan, and show the importance of each one of the steps. I know that that's a little bit of a high level answer, and I'm not sure if I'm answering the question correctly, but I think it's really just sitting down and saying, here's our comprehensive plan for the entire initiative, laying it out and talking through the importance of to get through this initiative.
Yeah. And Nate, if I could add to that, something to that, we almost want to say it's never too late. So what I've seen happen in this scenario is often at one point you'll see the negative impact of not having done the readiness, perhaps the changes already. If you have several releases, you might see that already after one release there's no response, there's no adoption. So it's very important that even if you haven't done the readiness up front, to still go back, pause, and look and use that to go back to leaders and say, well, we need to do it differently this time. Often, unfortunately, it's learning through mistakes in this case. And I'm just reading the question on my other screen here. When readiness, what I think is also important, just that first part is about how to tackle it when readiness is not yet established, is if you as an individual are aware of potential challenges or potential pitfalls that you really believe this is not going to work, this change is not going to be effective if we don't address, have the courage and be direct to go and actually show what those pitfalls are or what those challenges are, instead of just, saying, let's do a readiness. Sometimes leaders really need to see the practical outcomes. I hope that helps.
Yeah, I think so. And I'll just add, even though I'm not on the panel, but I just like to share my opinion. You guys know that. But so I think it's one thing is to bring in the experts, because a lot of times that internal trust isn't always established, which is not a bad thing. But bringing in data around external change management consultants or change management experts to show your executive team or your management team, like, this is our experience, this is the data around what we see as far as failures if you don't establish that readiness. So just, a little color for you there. But thank you for the questions. I know you have more here in the chat, and we'll get to them as well, but I'll hand it back over to you, Donia and Nate.
Thank you, Kyla. All right, so next up is the training plan. And as with the communication plan, this is a comprehensive plan of the training support that's required. And very importantly, as mentioned with the comms plan, it should look at the training that's required during the implementation, but also ongoing training that's going to be required. And that will be assessed. Actually, our next topic is metrics and KPIs, but it's important to realize that you'll need some kind of feedback mechanism in order to understand the training gaps even after going live. So again, it's not like, let's train everybody, send out user manuals, the initiative has gone live, and then you think that training is done. So please remember that when you're looking at a training plan. And as with the comms plan, it looks at the different stakeholder groups. So often when I've done this previously, I would look at the stakeholder groupings that were addressed in the communications plan. That could potentially be a match. Or I can give you another example where I was part of a workday rollout for a large organization, and the training was tailored against the key user groups. In this case was like the HR community, the management team, and then the employees. So we just had 3 groupings in that case. And very, very important is to look at the methods of training. Really, it's not just screenshots, or a manual. There's a lot of different methods that can be used, as well as different resources. So you might consider, for example, having internal trainers, which case they would need to be trained. So in that scenario, you would do train the trainers. Or alternatively, on this Workday project, for example, we had videos, we had online FAQ, we had online forums, and something that I think was very successful was we used the change champions to actually be super users. And so in every area, there was a super user, and people could literally go to a person and ask them, how do I do this? And that's also kind of part of the training. That was before COVID, so we were all in an office and you could go to one person. But of course, you could still have a super user as an expert, even in the virtual space. And those are really some of the key messages around what the training plan is. And why it's done is to make sure that the educational needs are met throughout the initiative. I'm going to emphasize it again. And post the initiative to have that ongoing learning until you feel that the status quo has been reached. Nate.
Okay, so when we talk about the how on the training plan, it's really a pretty straightforward way that our methodology that we help organizations create these training plans. And it's really first sitting down and saying, what are the end user groups? Again, different groups are going to require different training depending on their usage of the new technology, and their comfort with technology as a whole. And then it's really sitting down and saying, what are the selected training methods that are available? Again, we find a lot of times, and especially in organizations that haven't completed a technology initiative in the last 5 years, a lot different now. So that we're all used to 10, 15 years ago, where you put a manual in front of someone, they flip through page 1, page 2, and they go through and use the system. Now there's a lot more interactive ways of training. There's a lot more opportunities to individual specific user. Then we sit there and say, what are the strengths, weaknesses, and gaps with the training methods and the resources in an organization? Do they have a formal training organization? Do they have an education department? Do they have employees in other areas throughout the organization? And is this something we can piggyback on that? And then it's really sitting down and saying, what is the timeline, and how are we going to work back from go live, post go live, working backwards to say, when do we start training? I think that's really important here to talk about the fact that without fail, every one of our clients, we talk about the fact that when we kick off a change management initiative, training, even though it's far down the line as far as an implementation, is really something that needs to start today. You really need to sit down and say, how are we going to train the people? And you really have to start with that mindset of, how are we going to get people ready to use the technology? If you have the technology, you can have the best technology in place. If people don't know how to use it, if they're not trained efficiently and effectively, you're going to fail. That we say, hey, right now, let's start from the beginning. And as we're going through this implementation, let's think about how we're going to get people ready to use it and how we're going to make them comfortable with the system going forward.
Yeah. Thanks.
Excellent. Sorry, Donia. I was going to see if we could pop in with a few more questions, if you don't mind.
Thank you. Carla, while you bring up Krisha, I just wanted to thank Nate for mentioning about that it's throughout the journey. We don't just look at training right at the end. It would be too late if it's, because it's done at the end, often it's thought about just before go live. So it is important to have it throughout the journey. And this brings me to the point that I'm hoping talking to the audience, you can see that how all of these are weaving into each other already, all these deliverables, and that these deliverables become live documents. So a lot of the feedback you'd get once you've done the change impact, once you've gotten feedback from communication, to keep feeding the training plan throughout the journey and refining the documentation. Thank you, Carla, for allowing me to add a little bit more.
And that is perfect. It was like you were reading the mind of this user, because this is a very similar question. So one of our LinkedIn audience members said, is change management something that can be dialed into the program at different points, or is it a big mistake to not integrate it from beginning to end? So maybe Nate, we'll start with you on that one.
Yeah, this is a great question, and this is something that really hits home. One of our biggest clients here at Third Stage, we kicked off about a year ago. They were about around 9 months into a technology initiative, the implementation program. We were called in, where I would say 9 months into a 24-month initiative, and really, I would say it's never too late to start. So it's it's ideal. Obviously the best case scenario is to start everything at the beginning. It's never too late to start, and you can always go through and you can make up the steps and you can catch up to where you are. It's like a lot of different pieces of a digital transformation. It's something that's really important that you address change, that you address the change impacts, the change initiative that you're going through. Never too late to start, and there's always something that you can gain out of it by doing it, even if it's really late within the project.
Excellent. And Donia, anything to add to that?
Yes. I want to bring in here. It's really great to bring in this element of a health check. I love this word. It's something that I've been more recently in my career exposed to. I think because of these kind of scenarios like this user has brought up, where things are not done up front. And I really like this concept of a health check. And as Nate mentioned, we are working with some companies that have actually had this pitfalls and not done it up front and realized, okay, we need to start with this, or we need to weave it through. So we stop, we pause, we come in, we do a health check against all the categories, all the objectives of change management, look at what are the gaps and what is the corrective action that can be taken.
All great stuff. And then we have a few more questions here. Do you guys want to address those now, or do you want to finish up with your PowerPoint and we can do it at the end?
Carla, we've got one more deliverable to go through. So
Great.
Just to connect all 5, and it might just close off the picture. Do you agree, Nate, that we quickly finish off?
Yeah, and KPIs are fairly quick, fairly
Yes.
straightforward. So let's do that, and then we'll jump into some questions. And I know we're running a little bit behind, so
Okay.
We could go through KPIs real quick.
All right, KPIs, as Nate said, very quickly, but very important, and something that needs to be looked at right at the beginning. If you remember with that readiness document we spoke about, we look into why is this change taking place. Already from there, you need to ask the question of what do we want to achieve and how will it be measured? And that needs to be relevant. It needs to be measurable. It needs to be agreed, so that come down the line, you press the button, you go live, and then you can actually measure both the success of the benefits of the change as well as the user adoption. And that will allow to take corrective action if something is picked up. I'm going to just move on to the how, because I know we've got very little time. Again, I could speak about it for hours. Go ahead, Nate.
Yeah, so basically this is KPIs are really something that we link back to the first deliverable that we start with, and that is really sitting down and talking to the end users and the leadership and saying, what is it that what are your goals from this new technology initiative? And it's really saying, what do you hope to get out of the technology? How are we going to measure what success is? Measuring, creating a measuring mechanism, and really sitting down and starting to say, can we measure how we're doing things today, and get a baseline for where we are today and where we will, and then start to then really track key performance indicators, not only on our current technology, but as we go live and as we go post live, and using the system to really sit down and say, how are we benefiting from this technology? This is really one of the most deliverables within a change management initiative. However, I say this is really probably one that organizations struggle with the most. It's really hard to define. It's really hard to measure. It's really hard to track, but organizations that and clearly create KPIs and run their business based on the success and on the benefits that they're getting from their technology really see the most benefit from a new technology initiative.
Awesome, guys. Well, if we can, we're going to take a few extra minutes to go over these questions, um, if you're ready for that. So if you're done sharing, I can put them up here on screen if you want to be able to see them. So first of all, I just want to. Lindsay has a great question here. Um, so are all the deliverables shown at the beginning, or are they in parallel, or what does that look like as far as those?
Donia, you want to take that?
Yeah, maybe I could. I was just going to say, maybe I could take that, Nathan. It actually works very well with this final slide that we've got on. So they are not stepping stone. Yes, absolutely, they can be done in parallel. There's some that you would obviously, likely want to start up front. Some that are clearly up front. For example, the readiness assessment. But once it's done, the readiness assessment, it becomes a live document, and you need to continue feeding that document as more clarity and more changes are defined along the way. And then as you sort of like start one, you carry on with it, you start the next one, and then you start the next one. So they do end up moving in parallel. And I'm really glad you asked this, because our final slide shows suddenly 15 items. And that's because we want to show you that the deliverables that run in parallel are addressing what we consider these 15 objectives. And the most important thing is to reach these objectives. Whether you're going in parallel, you might go a bit like in a circle, but ultimately to make sure you address all the objectives of change management that are listed here.
And just one thing to add to that, I think,
Yes.
Donia, you really made a great point, and that is there is some linear nature to these deliverables, but it's really when we sit down with the client and we're kicking off a change management initiative, we make sure that we spend a good day at the beginning of a project going through all of these deliverables and all of these phases of a change management initiative, because they do need to work in parallel. They do need to, you need to start KPIs. You need to start thinking about them at the beginning of a project. You need to start thinking about the way you're going to communicate, the way you're going to train your employees. So while it's, it probably, it always starts off with assessment to really say, how ready are we for this change? It's really important to know that all of these need to be addressed from the beginning. So you need to start thinking about all five right from the start.
Absolutely, definitely something to consider. So this is a really interesting question too, and I think it goes into something that Eric said and that Dominic also touched on in his quality assurance and the overall ROI of a digital transformation is that concept of user acceptance. So this question says, do you think it's useful to combine the planning for user acceptance testing and wider training as training for UAT? And kind of saying, can people get familiar with the new process and technology?
I'm just taking a moment to really get to the heart of this question.
I think so too. I think it's basically user acceptance testing and the wider training. Should those be done together, or what does that look like as far as not only the structure, but how do you get them familiar outside of testing with the new process and technology?
Yeah. Well, the way I see it is that they're probably different things. So the user acceptance testing is usually done with a small group to see, how's this technology matching to the requirements. Whereas when we're talking training, we're actually looking at training across the organization, across all the stakeholders, people that are somehow engaging with this change. Everybody needs to be taken into consideration. So I see UAT group as a smaller group, if I understood the question correctly. And obviously the people doing the UAT will probably get to have a little bit more interaction with the system up front, but really everybody needs to be considered in the training plan.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and I think it's important just to add to that. None of these happen in a bubble. They're all part of system integration
Mm.
Testing, training, and user acceptance needs to happen concurrently. It all needs to happen considering all the other pieces. So you don't just complete user acceptance testing, system integration testing, and training. They're all happening at the same time.
Yes, and I think that cohesion is so important because sometimes those silos can kind of bubble up in these change management processes or plans, mostly because some teams are really good at change and some teams have a different subculture. So I know there's lots of questions here, and I really appreciate all of the great questions. We're going to do one more from YouTube, and then let Donia and Nate get back to their client work. But let's read this question. So, how do we align the change management and the project management of the actual digital transformation requirements? Is one part of the other? Are they managed by two different teams, or are they a sequential endeavor? So let's start with you on this one, Donia.
Yes. Okay. Thank you, Kyla. So the way I see this is that the change management is part of the project management. So a project manager would need to look at so many elements of the entire project. For example, the development of the actual system, for example, or a piece of customization, and the change management steps would be part of that overall plan. So as Nate said, all of these things are integrated. In terms of management by separate teams, part of it, we highly recommend that there are focused change management resources, especially in larger projects. In some cases, if it's a very small company, for example, or a very small change, as long as change management is addressed, it can be done by the same project management team. But as I started out saying, project management looks at a lot of different elements, and we need the change management expertise to focus. You saw all those different deliverables, how they feed into each other, looking at the different impacts of different groups. So it's very important to have the change management focus working integrated into the full project. Thank you.
Absolutely. Won't even elaborate on that. That was a great answer.
Just like mic drop situation here. Great.
Okay,
Great session, you guys. Thank you so much. And I know, thank you to all of our great engagement. I know you have a lot of questions. If you'd like to connect with Donia and Nate, I did drop both of their LinkedIn profiles in our LinkedIn stream. So be sure to follow them for additional thought leadership in this area. I also highly recommend downloading our 2023 digital transformation report, as that is a great section in change management to understand kind of how it fits cohesively throughout that. So some logistics, we're going to take about a 2-minute break, and then we're going to come back with some quality assurance and some vendor management Q&A with our third stage EMEA team. And then lastly, we are going to finish out with our CIO panel. So these are CIOs, current CIOs, former CIOs in the specific EMEA area. So it's a great opportunity to learn about the evolution of the CIO and understand where information technology is going as an industry. So with that, thank you so much, Nate and Donia. And we will see you in about 2 minutes, folks.
Thanks for your time, everyone.
Thank you.
Good morning, good afternoon, depending on where you're joining from today. Thank you for joining our Digital Stratosphere EMEA. This is our afternoon session. Just a few event logistics if you are jumping in to join us for this Q&A. So we can see all of your questions and comments on the social media platform that you're joining from. So please feel free to engage with this conversation. This is a Q&A session. We're actually done with PowerPoints for the day. So we like to finish with the fun stuff. So we'd love to hear from you about your questions around quality assurance and overall vendor management. So we have Clifford, who we met earlier this morning, but we're going to be doing some Q&A with him. So Clifford, could you give us a bit more introduction on your background? Because I think a lot of our audience doesn't realize the wealth of experience that you have.
Sure, I'll do that, Carla. Maybe just let me address one thing up front. I did hear you say that these are the more fun sessions in the afternoon. So leading into my background, I'm an IT guy. That we don't do fun. So I'm looking to you to bring that fun element to it. So great. On a more serious note, thanks for the intro and welcome again to the delegates who have joined. Yes, on my background, so I have spent many years managing and leading large multinational ERP programs, as well as consulting on it for different consulting houses, including KPMG and EY, Gartner, and I have also been a CIO before that, so I kind of get the challenges and pressures and complexities that organizations go through in terms of having to implement AI from a client perspective. And as of the last year and a half or so, very much involved with trying to establish our EMEA footprint in Europe, Middle East, and Africa. And this Stratosphere is, of course, a major event on that journey. So thank you for having me again today, Carla.
Absolutely. And thank you so much for taking the time to share your insight on this important topic. We also brought Dominic Lane up, who is our VP of EMEA, and also did our quality assurance kind of overview when it comes to actually methodology and deliverables this morning. So it gives this an opportunity to ask him any follow-up questions regarding that. So Dominic, I'm going to go the same to you, and maybe you can give us a more in-depth background of your experience with digital transformation.
Well, it's a good question. Yeah, so unfortunately, I've got kind of a long background, more than 20 years, maybe even 30 years. So yeah, so my background really was large ERP. So I used to work for Oracle years ago, and when that sort of, in the early days when it was still Smart Client and not very good pre-internet. But then we quickly got into the modern way, and did a lot of work with big programs for Oracle, SAP, big manufacturing organizations, telecoms. So, and slowly that sort of map of just having an ERP and not interconnected systems has changed, and slowly we've been part of that digital revolution. And for me, it was really, in the early days, it was all around, electronic invoices. Can we stop shuffling paper around? Electronic invoices, XML, EDI, and slowly that's sort of moving into much more complex areas around, full integrations, a digital back office, completely digitizing all assets and artifacts. You've obviously got the front end, Amazon, Shopify. I've been involved in quite a few projects that have integrated Amazon for fulfillment by Amazon, Shopify into NetSuite and things like that. So that whole digital shop, digital front end, digital factories, and now you're looking at AI and distributed sort of distribution kind of online. So the whole thing kind of moving from old clunky disparate systems to full SaaS, PaaS and digital footprints across the digital back office, digital shop, digital front end, digital factory, digital warehouse. Really quite exciting. And up into I've had less experience of the whole data lake and AI and RPA, but that's sort of something we're starting to, get more and more into at the moment. And so for me, my ERP background has really morphed into this whole thing about digital strategy. It's not just ERP; it's a whole bunch of other things that incorporate. What's that nirvana of end state look like? So it's been really, really good. And kind of still young enough to understand some of these technologies now. So the next 10 years look really, really quite interesting in that sort of space.
Well, it certainly has evolved, and as both of you are parents of teenagers, you have been thrown into the technology space, certainly both personally and professionally, I'm sure. And I've also never heard you with your accent say Amazon, so that was a fascinating experience.
Amazon,
Right.
yeah. Did I say it differently?
Yeah, right. But let's jump into kind of talking through.
Shopify, yeah, it's very English. Shopify,
Yeah, right.
Amazon.
It is. Yeah, I love it. Makes me feel super sophisticated. So let's jump into kind of the quality assurance and understanding kind of where that fits within the digital transformation project. So Clifford, I'm going to go to you with this one. When it comes to quality assurance, how can you be sure that your quality assurance plan is optimized for success?
Yes, I think in responding to that question, Carla, perhaps one needs to start with this as to what does one want to achieve with a quality assurance plan. And simplistically put, I think it really assists the client in the decision-making process. And what do I mean by that? So what we're saying is that it assists the client in making informed decisions at critical intervals throughout the project lifecycle. And of course, why informed decisions? Because the quality plan hopefully sets out the predefined criteria that need to be met for critical deliverables along that project roadmap. So in terms of ensuring that it's optimized, one has to ensure that that one understands the deliverables. One has to ensure that the plan talks to the type of metrics in terms of industry best practice that need to be in place for those deliverables. And then, of course, it's equally important as to who makes the decision. We don't necessarily want an SI marking their own homework. So having some level of independence and objectivity. And if we have those 3 or 4 components in place, then I think you have a good foundation for your quality assurance plan.
And building on that, Dominic, how do you ensure that you have ownership over your quality assurance plan and it's matching your business goals and objectives as opposed to that of your software vendor or SI?
Yeah, good question. I think that's probably part of having and one of the benefits of having independent assurance, where you can kind of go over the top of kind of all the different areas and departments, stakeholders, to look at that whole governance model, the charter, to ensure that everything that's in that charter and assurance plan, quality assurance plan is actually enacted. I think we mentioned it before. Sometimes these things look good on paper, but how do they actually become real? And that's some of the steps we went through earlier in terms of really assessing what position certain areas are in and having a proper RAG status that is backed up by an action plan which goes into a management plan and gets enacted. So I think you really got to have that independent view as well as good PMO.
So with that independence, we talk a lot about that obviously here at Third Stage, Clifford, because that's, who we are and the value that we bring to our clients. But can you kind of explain the different agendas of partners that go into a digital transformation project and why it's important to just understand that professional skepticism? And sorry, I stole your buzzword because it's now mine. So.
Absolutely. So I think what clients need to realize, Carla, is that all the different stakeholders involved in a digital transformation program don't necessarily have the same agenda and the same expectations in terms of outcome and success, and certainly don't have the same definition of success, which is a pretty important point when you're embarking on a lengthy, costly transformation type exercise. So to me, it really does start with having some common and documented and preferably embedded in the SI contract T's and C's or definitions of what constitutes success for this engagement, so that there's a uniform standard definition for success, and from that one can then start to define the different quality metrics. And let's face it, for the vendor, as one can expect, the agenda is going to be pretty much ensuring that they meet their contractual obligations. That's generally going to take us to the deployment of the solution and not much beyond, perhaps a little bit of what's generally called hypercare or hand-holding type of support. And it's absolutely important that we are able to assess whether those objectives have been met, and therefore having those quality metrics embedded in the contract up front in order to ensure that it meets the client's expectations in terms of what constitutes success for the project, and not the vendor's expectations, because they are going to be different. So fundamentally important that there is that uniform definition to start with, and that the quality metrics and quality plan enable the achievement of those objectives, and all stakeholders buy into that.
Absolutely. And this is a great question from one of our users on LinkedIn here that goes along with those. It's, what are some shared KPIs that you should have expectations to achieve with your SI or software vendor within that contracting? So I think that's an interesting question. So maybe Dominic, we'll start with you on that one.
Yeah. What KPIs to ensure your project is being run properly? I mean, we kind of mentioned it a bit earlier about assurance, and assurance will come in and kind of have a look at what these KPIs mean, and look at PMO statuses, and is it really green? What is it? What is the truth under it? I guess the things you can do to manage these is, I mean, obviously you've got the plan versus actual, so you have sort of the time KPIs, the time cycles, plan versus actual. So quite often you have a graph that says, this is what we are. You can visually see these things, and it's kind of a nice little metric there. Obviously, you've got to track variances, so budget variance, task variance, utilization, things like that against budget are also quite good. Quite difficult to manage. There are tools that can do this. You've got quality KPI, so I guess depends on what stage you're out of a project. Like at the start, you might have a CRP, and that has a parking lot, and you basically have lots of questions. We've got these ones unanswered, answered. Is it gap fit? So you have these sort of burn down metrics that you can measure as well. Obviously, there's test metrics, defect metrics. So each stage usually has a different set of KPIs. I mean, one of the things I'll probably add is quite important to have and these are all part of a stage gate review normally, but your weekly PMO should be able to have KPIs that sort of have a burn down rate, and kind of can give management an idea of whether you're on track or not. But I think for me, it's things like milestones, having your key milestones really defined well, entry and exit criteria. So everyone knows, hey, what happens when we get to the end of the design phase? What should be in place? What happens when we get to UAT? What metrics are we measuring? How do we enter UAT? Things like that. So I think the combination of those KPIs and strong milestones and entry exit criteria, and milestone reviews.
Absolutely. And what are your thoughts there, Clifford, as well? You mentioned kind of the contracting and getting that going up front. We actually have a great comment from one of our users on YouTube about needing to engage those quality metrics. What are your thoughts there?
Yes, thanks, Carla, and I'll talk to the question specifically in a second. But let me first say that it's fundamentally important that one has the conversation with the executive and gets them to understand what are the critical decisions that will need to be made, that they will need to make on this journey, because that's where it starts. We talk about what are the quality metrics. So there's certain fundamentally critical decisions that the executive will need to make. They're going to be primarily around how they structure the contract, how they structure the project, who needs to do what in terms of roles and responsibilities. It's going to be around the design. What are the pain points and business process requirements going forward? The business case, what are we looking to achieve? Testing and go live. So there are probably 6 or 8 absolutely critical decisions that you want your executive involved in, and not involved in. You want them to own those decisions. And let's take just one major decision: go live. As a client, how will on what basis will you decide whether you are ready to deploy the new solution into the business environment? What are the key criteria? And that's an important question to have with the executive up front and the members of the steering committee. And typically it's going to be, as Dom was saying, it's going to be around the extent to which the solution's been properly tested, the extent to which the end users have been properly trained, the data's been migrated, and 3 or 4 other critical areas. So in terms of what metrics does one apply, I think the first question is, what are the critical decisions that need to be made, and what are the metrics that will inform them? Secondly, and then I think thirdly, and it's useful to document even to this level of detail, thirdly, what is the type of evidence, in what format that will be presented to the executive to enable those decisions to be made? And that leads me to the question that around the SI. The SI has an absolutely critical role to play, of course, in ensuring that the deliverables are delivered in accordance with the predefined levels of quality. And therefore, and the only way to ensure that happens is to embed it in the contract up front. If you don't, good luck to the client that's trying to have that conversation with an SI halfway through the project when when you're burning X number of dollars per day, etc. It's going to be a very difficult conversation. So we certainly encourage and advocate that clients have these conversations upfront before the SI is appointed, and make it a requirement of the RFP process, and ensure that they're embedded. You're just in such a much stronger position if one can do that.
And that adds to the point I was trying to make around, certainly in your statement of work, and it's part of our quality assurance reviews or assurance review, you'd have a look at the statement of work. And as you said, you've got to have that clear. The vendors have got to have clear scope. The scope's got to be pretty detailed. The deliverables, the timelines, but also these milestones. So, I would list every key milestone that has these quality entry and exit criteria that we agree constitutes passing over that point in time. And of course, the things like the RACI matrix, responsible and accountable, and who does what really, what's the handover points. And that's why it's important, some of these milestones and quality reviews that have a proper formal review where people say, okay, I did this, are you happy, have you accepted it, rather than ticking the box. So I think formal stage gates are part of that quality metrics around the race.
And perhaps just a quick example of how this often plays out, Carlos. So one gets to the steering committee where the steering committee has to now decide, are we ready to go live or not? And you see the projects where one has these disciplines in place around quality, and it's predefined, and everybody understands what their roles are, etc. And that's a very kind of clean conversation, and by that I mean there's a good understanding of what are the key metrics, what's the decision that needs to be made, the types of evidence we need to assess, etc., etc. And it's a very informed decision following proper due diligence. When those disciplines around quality are not in place, it's generally a big debate, and nobody quite understands where we're at and how well we've done in certain areas, and not quite sure what evidence is available to kind of ensure that those objectives have been achieved or those deliverables have been met, etc., etc. So it becomes a little bit of a messy decision-making process within the steering committee, and that's absolutely as a direct result of not having a proper quality management plan in place.
So it sounds like the need is for that alignment around those quality metrics. And we've had a lot of questions throughout our event today from our awesome audience about executive alignment. So how do you achieve that alignment around those metrics and ensure that it's something that you can trickle down through the organization? Dom, why don't we start with you?
That's another one for Clifford, I think.
Oh, okay. Let's start with Clifford.
Nice hospital pass there. Thanks, Dom.
I thought you talked about that earlier, so yeah.
Yes, no, absolutely essential that executive alignment, Kyla, and the question I think you're asking is alignment around what, and I mentioned this earlier as well. I'm a strong proponent of an executive type boot camp up front, exactly to tease out those questions and get the executive to agree and understand what such a transformation journey entails, what are the critical milestones, potential pitfalls, and very importantly, what decisions, once again, are you going to be asked to make? Because that allows them to prepare. That allows a head of department or business process owner to know that in 3, 6, 9 months' time, we're going to do user acceptance testing. I'm going to be accountable as the head of finance, head of supply chain, etc. I'm going to be accountable for providing an opinion to the steering committee, to my executive forum, as to whether I believe within my area of responsibility, we've done sufficient testing to deploy the solution. And so one has to set those accountabilities up front and ensure that that everybody understands what they're going to be asked to do further downstream on the project. And once we understand those critical decisions, we can now facilitate those conversations going forward by ensuring that we have properly defined metrics for those decisions, so that there's no ambiguity around who needs to do what to assess the quality of the deliverables going forward. And when you have that type of framework in place, it really makes those decisions so much easier. And of course, it demonstrates that as an executive team, one has followed good governance and appropriate due diligence in arriving at those decisions. So that's, from a good corporate governance perspective, that's fundamentally important.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'd probably add to that then for, you talk about the boot camp, and I know it's part of our offering, but I think the key bits are, to add to your point, is that alignment is, you have to start with the strategy, don't you? That strategy definition and alignment, and to articulate that strategy, you've got to have something to align, haven't you? So those boot camps are really quite important. Some of the execs probably don't know, do they? They're like, oh, I didn't realize we were doing that. Oh, So unless you have that alignment and buy-in, it's very difficult for people to do anything. You've got to have that mandate from the top down. That's why sponsorship is one of the key critical success factors. We haven't really done a session on that, but it's one of the key critical success factors for senior management to be bought in. We could do a whole session on that one day about critical success factors and how they should be implemented. But yeah, just to add those comments.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, let's go to this question from Sam Graham here on LinkedIn, because I think it's a really important question around quality assurance and understanding how that affects different size organizations. So Sam says, I've seen small and medium-sized companies think they can just quote unquote wing it without proper documentation. Is this also true for many big companies? So let's start with you, Clifford, on this one.
Yes, well, the simple answer is no, that you can't wing it. And I think, Kyla, one has to ask, if we have an implementation project that does not have the required standards of documentation, then, and that doesn't necessarily need to be in a kind of paper format. I mean, we're talking about digital information stored within whatever repositories, but it needs to be recorded, and one has to then question if it's not there or absent or not at the required level of quality and completeness. One has to question the SI and the implementation approach and methodology being utilized, because certainly any SI that's worth its salt is going to come with a comprehensive implementation methodology, which is going to require dictate, in fact, certain deliverables. And in fact, for the SIs to maintain their accreditation with the big solution providers, they need to conform and adhere to those standards. We need the design documented somewhere so that we need the business processes. We need it down to a certain level of detail in terms of what are the transactions, the tasks, the roles, the reports that are going to be generated and built into the new solution. So if those types of things are absent, I think it's a major failing on the part of the SI and cause for great concern on any project.
And that's why we always do a very detailed artifact review on what these are the documents you should have. These are ones that are missing, or but I'd also, to answer the question, I think they certainly shouldn't wing it, but I still see a lot of companies do that now. And quite often at the start, when we say, okay, we're going to come and do a current state assessment, almost every one I've done recently, and this is maybe pre a big ERP project, but after they've got existing systems they've been using for years, when we say, what's your current processes, most of them don't have process maps. Well, show me your SOPs then. Oh, well, yeah, Dave did that, and he kind of, it's, all right, what about a system architecture? Really? Sort of. So again, when we go in, normally it's that current state assessment. We end up rewriting a lot of that stuff. I think you're right. At the end of a project, when an SI has been in there, I'm still quite, left a little bit aghast at some of the quality of the documents. Some do it really well. Others are left wanting. I very, very rarely see an end-to-end solution design document. You get lots of functional specs. Here's my silo, here's that silo, and some configuration workbooks, but having an end-to-end solution and a document that's got true revision numbering and stuff like that, I think the industry is woefully lacking in that. 20, 30 years ago, when I started out, we were hot on paperwork. Everyone did dotted the I's, crossed the T's. You make one small change, you got 10 pages of documentation, just in case someone leaves and someone's got to pick it up. There's a lot of pride in that. I think now it's just too much money. You've got to be efficient, lean. People don't like to, you got to make sure that's in the statement of work. Again, produce a solution design doc, do this, do that, all the deliverables. But anyway, that's my 10 cents or 50p.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's
lots of them do wing it. Yeah.
Oh yeah. So, and I think the wing it piece is a lot of times when we come in, third stage either does very expensive restoration projects for those organizations that did wing it, or we come in for that program assurance to say, we will, take a look at all of your strategic documents, and then all of the partnership contracts with SI, those types of different things to help make sure that organizations are able to navigate this, because, again, you don't know what you don't know. In that type of arena. So we have another question here from our YouTube user that's quite technical. So this is for software development specifically. So quality assurance takes a deeper meaning. There's the quality of the UX UI, and then there's the quality of code, making sure it adheres to SE principles. How is that handled? This is way outside my wheelhouse, so I hope somebody else has a great answer to this. So who wants to take a crack at it first?
I was chopping at the bit. I could see it.
You're the IT guy, aren't you? Yeah. It's a little bit outside of my kind of experience as a project program manager at that level. I guess I'm thinking where I've had issues around the build and that sort of coding is issues with sprints, this agile sprint methodology that sometimes is deployed, and I've not been on a project in the last couple of years that's done one really well. And I think these things around the quality metrics that you're probably talking about is left a little bit wanting. So, and I think some of the issues we've had with assurance work has been after sprints. The sprint has happened. The quality of the code and the testing and the user interfaces don't really kind of match. As I see Sam's not agreeing with the agile. Yeah, so agile for me shouldn't really be deployed unless people really know what they're doing. I much prefer the waterfall on ERP implementations for sure.
Yeah, I mean, I would add to that to say that I think it's fundamentally important, and what I do see happen quite often is in terms of development, the client, where clients are big enough and large enough, that is to utilize their own technical staff to provide oversight on what the SI is doing and ensure that they comply with the organization's quality metrics regarding development. So I think that the client interaction and oversight of the development effort from the SI is extremely important, so that there's no misalignment between the standards that the SI bring and the client's own technical standards around development.
Yeah,
absolutely, definitely. So when we're talking about agile, and I'll bring up kind of a building point on this question. How does that affect the quality assurance requirements if you are taking more of an agile approach? And maybe for those that don't know the difference between agile and waterfall, maybe Clifford, you could give us a quick rundown on the difference there.
Sure. I mean, there's no doubt that the quality assurance approach is more complex on an agile project, and I think it's an interesting comment made in terms of not agreeing with agile in the ERP space. I have my concerns as well. And of course, all the major ERP providers these days also have an agile methodology. And I think that's because of the pressure that's come from the marketplace in terms of projects taking too long and so on. But essentially, the waterfall approach is a lot more structured, and it can follow a very structured and systematic stage-gated process. So, as an example, we want to complete all the design before we move into build. We want to ensure that the build has happened in accordance with the design before we move into testing, and that's for the full solution. Of course, in an agile approach, it's a lot more iterative, and it's a lot more focused around specific scrums or functional teams. So we could have multiple components of the solution at different stages on the project lifecycle. We could have some development happening. We could have some iterative testing happening on different solutions, and at some stage it all needs to come together. So it does complicate the QA approach, but it's certainly a comprehensive quality assurance plan and program is still absolutely possible within an agile environment.
Yeah, I must admit, to add that I don't like sprints in ERP if we can, or agile. I mean, it normally ends up being, we've done some design as a bunch of requirements, and they get to a stage where they go, okay, we've got some requirements, we've got a set bit of time, how much work can we do in that period, and then go to the next bit. But it's difficult to prioritize, and I've never quite kind of understood how the backlog doesn't go down quick enough, and sprint 1, sprint 2, and what's the overlap, and sometimes it's done for config items as well, not just development, where you've got 5 interfaces and we kind of do the development sprint. It's done with config as well. So one of the things we advocate is, unless it's really tried and tested or you've got massive development, I don't like offshore, unless it's well managed or just for certain key areas. And the agile sprint methodology is a tricky one for me. I've not seen it go well I've probably only done 4, but they've always gone a little bit astray. From what I can tell. No one really knows what's going on. It's just sort of a bit of chaos that people like to do, and then at the end of it, we try and unpick the chaos and see what happened. Oh, there's remediation to do. I've not seen it done well, so I'm sure there's agile people out there screaming at the screen now, going, "Of course, it can be done well." But
yes, actually, on our live stream this last week with Wendy, who wrote a book on strategy to reality, is her book. It's called. One of our great guest questions talked about technical chaos, which I think is a great way to kind of describe what can happen in a digital transformation if you don't have those roadblocks to quality assurance. So moving through kind of what that looks like from a vendor overall integration, I'm wondering if you could share kind of a high level top 3 tips to achieving a quality assurance or a successful quality assurance plan. So Dom, let's start with you.
Okay, so sorry, top 10 key points for vendor quality assurance, or just quality assurance?
I mean, you can do 10. I asked for 3, but if you are an overachiever over there.
I heard top 10. Yeah, I think we've kind of touched on a lot of them, where it's what are the metrics you want to really test, and be measured on, your KPIs, and I think that quality plan should kind of reflect that, really, and certainly things of test metrics. You've got other important things like regression testing. I think I would look at regression testing, data reconciliation, business readiness. They're kind of some of the key planks, I think, for any project, and how you work that into a quality metric can be a little bit tricky, but they'll probably be the 3 areas I would look at. Regression testing is only there if you've got a live system. Obviously, a lot of people do new ERPs, but quite often we've got areas to do regression testing. But data reconciliation, difficult to do a KPI.
And what about you, Clifford? Are you going to do 10 or maybe 15 to top Dom? Or
I only did 3.
Sorry. Okay, let me focus. So I'll just do 3. I think number 1, ensure that you link it to the decision-making process. Understand what are the critical decisions. Number 2, ensure that for those critical decisions, around, and they're going to be around what's been, whether certain deliverables have been met on the project timeline. Ensure that you link those metrics to those decisions. And the third tip would be absolutely important that they are embedded within the SI contract so that you have a mechanism by which to hold the SI to account.
And those are great. I love how Dom went more on like the deliverable side and Clifford went more on the strategic side. So that's such a good sampling. So last question, true or false? So you don't have to, name top 10 things, Dom. So calm down. You'll be
I'm English. I use too many words to describe
Yeah.
few things.
So if you do not have a quality assurance plan for your digital transformation, it will fail. True or false?
Overall, true.
Is that it, Tom?
Yeah, wow.
Okay.
I'm
I said one
shocked.
word.
True.
You said one
Agreed.
word.
His feelings
I
are hurt because
agree.
we
True.
told him he was talking too much. True.
Yeah,
Okay.
I heard the brief that time properly.
Right, absolutely. So let's end here with a user question, because I think this is a really good one from one of our listeners on LinkedIn. So thank you so much for watching. To what extent do solutions like SaaS and cloud solutions play a role in quality assurance? We've seen obviously a huge migration into more software as a service and software as a subscription based solutions. So what does that look like as far as that quality assurance piece to that? And Dom, let's start with you.
To some extent, it may simplify things. So for some of the SaaS solutions or cloud, certainly things like Oracle, in the old days, Oracle was out of the box solutions, or so we thought. And then people tend to over egg requirements gathering, and end up sort of building something that's not what the original ERP was for, and it's supposed to, get rid of your legacy, have a out of the box ERP, best practices. I think we moved away from that a lot with people extending and customizing ERP. I think cloud brings it back to that sort of area where it's out of the box or in the cloud.
Mm-hmm.
So you have a much more structured, usually a template based. Some of these ones come pre-configured. So I think there is a probably easier to QA and have a quality product around the SaaS products now, because they're less tampered with in aspects. So that would be my initial view. The only thing you've got to look at is how it affects your IT governance, your IT operating model going from maybe on-premise to the SaaS model, things like that. There's obviously quality and governance around that area. But I think it simplifies it.
Simplifies. Okay. And
Clifford
what
might have a
about
different view.
Yeah, what about you, Clifford? What's your feedback on that question?
So I think SaaS models are generally more of a adopt rather than adapt approach in terms of the design. So certainly in terms of that phase, it's somewhat simpler, but I wouldn't suggest that it's any less important in terms of SaaS or cloud deployment. It might be simpler in certain around the design, but it's still extremely important.
Yeah, but I think your metrics would go a little bit about what I was saying around data. It's all more about the data than data reconciliation, and what's your metrics around that, and business readiness, as opposed to have we built it properly? Have we measured all the requirements? You still need to do that, but I think it probably simplifies that bit. But yeah, you're right. No less important to do it. Certain quality assurance is still important.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much for joining us and sharing these great insights. Obviously, quality assurance is one of the things that we see as a need in the marketplace, which is why we specifically in this region put so much emphasis on how do you ensure that your digital transformation is successful, and quality assurance is that insurance piece. It's very similar to, you wouldn't drive a car without insurance. So if we can help you in that way, or just simply have an informal conversation, let us know. You can always reach out via LinkedIn. You can also download our 2023 digital transformation report, which goes through all of our quality assurance framework. That's in the description for each one of these events. as well as on our website under our thought leadership. So thank you so much for all these great questions. And thank you to Clifford and Dom. We're going to take about a 2-minute break, just similar to what we did there. You can remain on the stream. And we're going to actually end our event today with a very informative CIO panel. So these are CIOs, former CIOs from the EMEA region that can share a wealth of knowledge around digital transformation and just IT strategy in general. So we're going to have a great conversation with them when we come back. Remember to think of those questions. You can engage right on your platform that you're joining from. We can see all of the chats. If you've seen me all day, pull up those questions, and you do not want to miss this opportunity to ask these important stakeholders these questions. So we will see you in about 2 minutes, and hang out with us. Thanks again to Clifford and Dom.
Pleasure.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Hi, everyone. Welcome back to Digital Stratosphere EMEA. I'm very excited to be able to welcome our CIO panel. These are CIOs from the EMEA area, former and current, that we're going to get to ask some questions. So before I pull them all up on stage, just some reminders when it comes to logistics. We can see all of your questions and comments when it comes to whatever social media platform you're joining from. They all aggregate here and we're able to see them and pull them up on screen. So I highly encourage you to ask questions and engage with the conversation. So let's get our CIOs up here and joining us today. We have a wealth of knowledge here in this area. So I will do some quick introductions and then let everyone introduce themselves, as they're going to do a better job than I can on their extensive experience in the area. So we'll do some round robin style, and when they are speaking, I'll pull them up into that top tier so you're able to see and hear them a bit better. So Clifford, we know you pretty well as our fearless leader here in the EMEA region, but can you give us just some background on your overall experience in the CIO role specifically?
Thank you, Carla, and welcome everybody. Good to see my colleagues online as well. Looking forward to a very interactive chat. So thank you for being here today. Carla, it's been a while since I left my CIO days, probably about 15 years, but so probably well before the start of this whole digital transformation era. But I have spent a lot of time with organizations such as Gartner, Ernst & Young, KPMG, and Third Stage, of course, as well, in working with CIOs and executives and helping them navigate this rather nebulous term of digital transformation. So no doubt we're going to unpack that a little bit further today, but that's just a quick overview of my background. Thank you.
Excellent. Well, let's go to you next, Peter, if you could.
Yeah, great. Thanks, Carla. So I've been CIO for over 22 years. I've been in the CIO role, so I've had extensive management experience in the role and running large teams. I've been working mainly in downstream oil and gas, so that's refining and storage and distribution. I have completed an MBA degree. I've also been at Harvard Business School and Oxford Business School and Rotterdam Business School, where I did a few business-based and IT-based courses. And my main areas of interest are on strategy integration. A lot has been spoken about today around complexity and the complex overlays between business and IT, and those are the sorts of things that interest me in trying to find solutions for those complexities. The other area is IT of the future. So really trying to understand how to structure your IT department and divisions going forwards. And then, of course, governance. And we've heard there were some questions around governance in smaller organizations and the need for governance. The governance, my specific governance focus is around the architectures area, data, and of course, security. That's it from me, Carla.
Lovely. Thank you, Peter. We're so excited to learn from you. Ridwan, how about yourself?
Oh, sorry, it's you. I didn't expect you to call me so suddenly.
I know. I wanted to go out of order. I almost did that to Ghassan, but I'm like, he's not on our team, so that's not very nice.
That's a typical CIO in the executive session. I'm just joking. I'm director at Third Stage. Prior to joining, I spent about 5 years at Gartner, where I actually worked with, coached, mentored, and helped CIOs and chief digital officers with strategy. So prior to that, my CIO experience has been in healthcare and in financial services. So it was interesting. In the first time I did it, the financial services digital transformation wasn't there. I went from a senior business analyst straight into a CIO. A lot of guys who have come through the trenches will know exactly what I'm talking about. So that was very, very interesting. Learned a lot, though. Second time around, when I was a CIO, what was interesting is while I was executing the CIO duties, I did my MBA around digitalization. Yeah. So that's the experience I bring to the table, and I look forward to interacting with my colleagues today.
Well, excellent. Well, speaking of your mentor roles, we have our youngest member, which is the young gun here. Sholafel, you want to introduce yourself as well as one of our current CIOs within the area?
Yes, thank you so much. Yes, I am Tsolofelo Mwecha. In terms of my experience, so I come from a route of software development. I have a BSc and an MBA, like most of us these days. But what makes it interesting is that I started as a software developer and worked my way up from leadership and management all the way to CIO. So today, when you meet me, I'm one of those freshly minted CIOs, and Ridwan was one of my mentors while I was battling in the trenches, trying to convince business to do this thing called transformation.
Well, excellent. Well, we have a lot to learn from you as I know we're going to dive into the role of a modern CIO here in just a bit. But last but certainly not least is Ghassan. I feel like we're old personal friends at this point because you join all of our live stream. We learn so much from you. So if you want to, if you could just let us know a little bit about yourself and your background.
First of all, thank you, Kyler, for having me on the CIO panel. My name is Ghassan Kabbara. I was raised and born in the Middle East, in Kuwait most of my life. I worked in Saudi Arabia, a bit in Dubai and Bahrain. I graduated as an electrical engineer back in the 80s in Northeastern University, and my career started working as a hardware engineer fixing computers. That was kind of boring. You were just changing chips and motherboards. So I started to get into the software and the analytical side. So I worked with a software services company back in the early 90s. And then I evolved into as an IT manager kind of CIO position with car dealerships. I worked with 4 car dealerships and 10 years in the construction industry. Uh, Also, I've had a lot of chance to work as a consultant, worked with the Big Four on a couple of projects in oil and gas, and done over the half a dozen, actually over a dozen consultancies. And I'm an auditor as well. I go inside and I audit IT departments and do some freelance work. And I wear multiple hats.
Well, excellent. Well, we have a lot to learn from you today as well. So we've got a lot of folks on this panel. So if you'd like to dive into one of the questions that I answer, just go ahead and put your hand up and I will pull you up into the hot seat, as I like to call it, up here on front. But I want to start with you, Peter, first of all, and kind of talk about how the role of a CIO has changed within the last 5 to 10 years with your wealth of experience. And then building on that, how do you see it changing within the next decade or so?
Okay, so I think that over the last 10 years, we need to look at the business landscape and review how technology has impacted organizations, how during the pandemic customer behaviors and preferences have changed, which have also impacted on the way organizations need to be structured and how they need to deliver their services and so on. So when we're looking at the issues around organizational performance, we've also been exposed to a lot of the issues we've had on supply chain problems globally, and many supply chains being linked globally have had issues. We've all experienced problems, whether that relates to manufacturing or to food or any other services. So organizations basically have to start looking at, how do you transition to ensure that you remain relevant in this current context? And of course, to do that, the CIO is really very well positioned, given that there should be a lot of understanding, deep understanding of the technologies, of the potential capabilities of the technologies, and then also a good understanding of how that specific organization that they work in, how that organization needs to adapt to the changes and to respond to the changes that are expected by the consumers and the customers. So essentially, I think that, if you look over the last 10 years, just track back on the technology, track back on where CIOs were purely more focused on operational issues, probably infrastructural issues, application issues, and how that has transitioned into CIOs playing a leadership role in defining the new business operating models. So being part of business strategy and working together with business to try to reshape the organization and to pivot the organization so that it starts going down the route where it can start delivering value-added services to the consumers and the customers. And of course, that comes back to the point of saying that the CIO's role itself has transitioned to being more of a value-driven role. So it's not purely operational, it's focusing more on how do I deliver value to the organization that's going to result and improve the bottom line of the organization. So I think that that's sort of historically where we have been, and where things potentially have come from. And going forwards, we've been speaking about agility. We've been speaking about moving to, do we use waterfall? Do we use agile? How do organizations need to transition? What is the rate of change? What is the pace of change? And that is something that we're seeing is immensely relevant at the moment. That strategy in the past was largely drawn from history. It was largely incremental, whereas strategy going forwards is going to be based on exponential change. And exponential change cannot have a static historic strategy. It needs to have something like scenario-based strategies, so that as the trigger points happen, you can implement the strategy that's most appropriate. So I think going forwards, for CIOs, it's going to be an enormous challenge, but an extremely exciting period, and great to be in the role at this specific point in the history of technology and of organization transitions.
Absolutely. Very well said. And I love the energy around that excitement. So Clifford, talk to us a little bit about this evolution that you've seen not only in being a CIO, but advising CIOs.
Yeah, I mean, and I'll respond by latching onto a term that Peter used, Kyla, the operating model, and being able to influence an organization's operating model. It's not a role that we would have expected from a CIO even 5 or 8 years ago. So the CIO as a disruptor, I think, is an important role. And what I mean by the operating model, so essentially how organizations create, deliver, and capture value, and the types of capabilities required to do so. And of course, this in a market that is going through such a pace of change. So the CIO's ability to bring that outside in view and proactively influence business strategy, not react to it, which is, in my era as a CIO, and I've seen this change happen. In my era as a CIO, the traditional way of strategic planning was the business go away, do a strat plan, and come back, hand it to the IT guys, and 6 months later, you may get a response from the IT guys as to how they're going to respond to the business strategy. And typically that response is going to be crafted in techno language and generally start with listing the top 5 IT pet projects. And that's changed. The CIO as a disruptor has to be able to sense and be able to guide the organization in terms of responding to both digital opportunities and threats, and be proactive in being able to do that. And of course, the last point I make on that is that requires a seat at the executive table, and many CIOs struggle with that, either because they have a legacy of poor delivery or because they simply do not have the leadership skills and business acumen to be able to contribute at the executive table. So a whole lot of challenges for CIOs at this point in time, I think.
Absolutely. And Ghassan, can you talk to us a little bit about that overall evolution and how do you earn a seat at that table? And I'm just going to leave this right here. Have you read all those books or no?
Yeah, I guess. Yeah, thank you very much. I just want to build on what Cliff was saying. As you know, in the past, the CIO has been nothing but a back office, and IT has been treated as a cost center. And we want that to change. We want a seat on the table. So the first change that needs to happen really is the job description, I believe, of the CIO needs to be changed. So we can earn that seat on the table. And I'm sure there are a lot of companies that are CIOs that are trying to get to the second stage, not being order takers as such. So yes, to be a business leader, you need to be able to innovate and make changes, and also not only as a change agent, but also be able to translate the technology, the tech talk that we have with our team, and convert that in simple English to the executives. and we need to cultivate a network of people so they can be on your side. And really, it's a people's game at the end of the day. We need to get out of our seats from sitting talking to our technical people and start spending a lot of time with the executives. At the end of the day, as a CIO, we're a target in the middle. We've got our boss to worry about. We've got our subordinates. We've got our peers. So we have to go, around this target and do the tour so we can slowly build the trust. I believe we need to start building the trust.
Yeah, that's well said. And Tashola, I want to go to you. As you know, you are obviously in a sitting CIO role. How do you feel about that evolution into more of a strategic executive decision maker as opposed to just siloed in technology?
Yes, so it is very important. I think the question was, how do we earn the seat? So we
Mhm.
earn the seat at the table by being strategic. So one of the questions talking about being reactive or proactive. So that's where we start. We be proactive, and that starts off with us as CIOs understanding the business. We should understand the business probably more than anybody else, right? When you look at those departments, they're all about product. They understand product, marketing understands marketing. But as a CIO, I think you bring the most value by understanding the business from end to end, and you see the whole universe of how technology can create opportunities. They are started to create those conversations around opportunities is where I got to respect to be invited to those meetings at Exco to even have a seat in those important
Mhm.
conversations. So we need to move away from being seen as the guy who's going to fix your Wi-Fi to a guy who's going to speak possibilities. How do we see technology creating those opportunities for our business to add to the bottom line?
Absolutely. Spoken well from a modern CIO. And Ridwan, I know you advise CIOs. You're our main advisor when it comes to building transformation projects, but also how do you be a successful CIO? You even have a series on it that you've done for Third Stage with us as well. And so, how do you navigate these new political landscapes around being a CIO? I know you've mentioned something that's really always resonated with me is it's a very lonely role.
It is a very lonely role, and yeah, we forget in the at the start of back in the, I think it was around about the 90s, CIO actually stood for career is over. So I think it's coming back again if CIOs don't step up to the plate. So I'll build on what you're saying, Kyla, but also just going to that earning your seat at the table. So I'll give you a practical example. When I was in healthcare, so I I earned the seat on the table by what I call the ticket to the game. So everything is running, right? So you must make sure your back office and stuff is running. If that is not running, don't even bother trying to talk about strategic stuff. If the guy says it takes 2 weeks just to get a laptop out of you, I'm not interested in giving you 100 million for your project. So I think it's important that we mustn't overlook that. We mustn't give the wrong impression. That's still part of your job. So make sure that all of those things are running. Then start have the strategic conversations with the business. And then what will happen organically is like we shouldn't be asking for permission, because what happened in my case is that they needed somebody to look after corporate services. And because my department was running, I was starting to build out digitalization. Now, if you think about digitalization, it encompasses your entire business. It's not just an IT thing. So I did a lot of to answer your question about how do you navigate this, you have what Gartner calls us a digital evangelist. So you talk about it all the time, but you talk about it in business sense and you win them over. What ended up happening is that I ran IT as well as corporate services. And I'll bring it back to, there's a question that's being asked here. Are CROs the COOs of the future? Most definitely. It's already happening. It makes sense because what you're finding now is like, so even CROs are getting what they call head of IT. So they're getting them to run the back office and they're becoming more like the COO of IT. But going forward, I definitely see CIOs becoming the COOs. So how do you navigate this thing? By being politically savvy, understanding the business and the technology, and then triangulating all three to be able to show that it fits in with the business vision. And then going forward, the new term that's coming out now, it's called the future fit CIO. So instead of being an order taker, a modern CIO, you start to transcend and say, here's business models that you haven't even thought about, because AI is enabling that. So a bit of a roundabout way, I tried to cover many topics there. I hope I answered your question.
Yeah, oh, absolutely. You always do in such an eloquent way that's so easy to digest. So that's why we force you to be on all the live streams, Ridwan. You're our star. But Peter, how do we earn a seat at the table as a modern CIO? Crack the code on that for us.
Okay, so I think the first thing is to separate structure from the role that you're performing and the deliverables. So a seat at the table does not mean that you need to report to the CEO. Okay, and I think that you need to get that mindset shift. A lot of CIOs in a few years back, it was a drive to try and get a seat at the table by reporting to the CEO. That's not necessarily the case. There was an earlier question around being proactive or reactive. If you are a proactive CIO and you are contributing to the strategic discussion and you are participating in driving the agenda of the organization, because of your credibility, by being able to marry technology with your specific organization and industry that you're working in, you will be recognized as somebody that has a seat at the table. So I think that it's very important to get that sort of set in your mind, that it's not a positional play, it's a behavioral play. So I think that what needs to be done to make sure that you're going to get a seat at the table, as I mentioned, is it's the way you understand the technology environment, the business environment, the context of your organization, the context of the broader customer environment, what your customers are expecting from your organization, and therefore what you need to do as a CIO to integrate all of that to get you part of the strategic discussion, which of course is then going to result in business improvement to the organization, whether that is internal business improvement or external business improvement. So internal improvement could be operational efficiency improvements through technologies. External improvements could be value-driven, generating, income-driven generation type improvements.
Well said, Peter. Absolutely. I love that you touched on that opportunity to have a seat at the table. It doesn't mean you need to report to the CIO. It means you need to know the business. And speaking of that, Clifford, it sounds like based on what we're saying, the evolution is really moving into more of that business technologist. So maybe you can kind of explain to us some of the skills that are needed for a CIO in 2022 versus a CIO in 1992.
Sure, Carla. And one or two quite simple things come to mind. Language. Language is important, and we tend to, IT speak has a set of terminologies and acronyms of its own. And I know from being involved in many projects, often the business users don't have a clue of what we're talking about. And so just being able to use simplistic and frame things in terms of business outputs rather than IT techno speak. It builds bridges, but it's a great divide. And sometimes I think it's convenient for us as IT professionals to have our own language. It's kind of provides a little bit of an exclusive club. And it's so important that we just use simple language and we break things down. I mean, the number of times I've been waiting outside a CIO's office for a meeting, and I go around and look at the notice board, and there's a list of all the IT projects. They're all framed in IT terms. The SAP project, the infrastructure upgrade project, the land project, it's all framed in IT terms. And one has to, as an example, turn that around. So what are the business capabilities and competencies that we're hoping to improve or advance? And frame it in terms of why do we need to call it the SAP project or the Microsoft project? Can we not call it the business improvement project? or the business process re-engineering project, or whatever the case may be, the customer centricity project, etc. So I think something simple like language is a great divide, and we need to be able to speak in business terms and frame our contribution in terms of how it enables businesses and improves businesses' performance. So I think that's a simple but extremely important thing that we can do to improve the relationships and create joint accountability with business.
Absolutely. And I'm going to ask you to build on that, Ghassan, in how that works specifically culturally within our EMEA, specifically Middle East region, how that looks for a CIO that might be trying to create that influence around a digital transformation or any sort of project or strategic decision.
Thank you, Tyler. Before the CIO in the Middle East tries to build, I just want to say something because I've worked with SMBs and not SMEs. The difference between an SME and an SMB is SME is an enterprise and an SMB is a business. And sometimes you don't have the structure that an enterprise offers, from top to down to IT. The CIOs for those SMBs, the challenges they have now, as you know, no matter what size of an organization you have, and I want to focus a bit on the cyber threats, you're going to get attacked, whether you like it or not. Okay. And so the SMBs tend to have less resources to be able to mitigate the risks of attack. The same goes with emerging technologies. Okay. So they don't have those funds that they would like to have to start experimenting with the AIs or even the BOTs. So what I've noticed is that they're always trying to fight fire. So and that's why for them to innovate, it's very challenging. Okay, and that's where you have to go back to the CEO and ask for more budget, and you have to have a good proven case to be able to go one step beyond, because you basically you want funds to be able to move on. The same goes with the skilled workers that you have in IT. And what happens is we tend to outsource a lot in IT. And by outsourcing, what you do is you're not letting the person that works internally to get his hands onto a project. So eventually they feel left out. And I've seen this in a few companies that I've audited or I work with, where they've left you. So one of the reasons that people are leaving, and this is a statistic, is they don't see any room for growth in careers. So it's a very tricky situation. I'm talking about with respect to the Middle East for the CIO. But still, nevertheless, we do go knock on the doors on the CEO, and we tell them how we can try to innovate and what we can do. And but there's a lot of forces against you where you start to get politically savvy and use a bit of emotional intelligence and do the whole PR thing all over again. This is with this part of the world.
Absolutely. And I want to kind of build on what you said, Ghassan, with Toshola Fellow, and talk about those emerging technologies and the role of a CIO. I can only imagine trying to keep up with predictive analytics, artificial intelligence, machine learning, those all types of different new systems when trying to strategize what's best for the organization. How do you make sure that your business has that competitive advantage, or how would you recommend CIOs deal with all this new emerging technology?
Yes, thank you. So before I even answer that, I think let me start off with where Clifford left off regarding business talk. So one of the things I learned very quickly, my first board meeting about 5 years ago, I went in and everybody before me was hammered, right? They were blasted throughout their presentations. And I stood up, presented, and nobody asked a single question. And I thought, well done. But during lunchtime, speaking to the guys, I only realized to my surprise that nobody understood what I said. They were not asking questions because they didn't understand. I was just too technical, which loses the point, especially at that level when you're trying to drive a message of the importance of your projects. So learning a business talk, business skills talk, is a good point where we should start, especially once you get to the table. To go to your questions around technology, so it's very important for CIOs to stay abreast of what's happening in the technology space. Subscriptions to research companies like Gartner, McKinsey, you name it, those help a lot for you to keep abreast. But I think what I found the most important thing is how do you relate it back to your business? There are some technologies that are not going to help you a single bit just because of the type of business you're in, right? So not all technologies is going to work for you. I was in my previous job, big data was irrelevant, right? Everybody was going around with big data. You need to get on this, you need to buy a new data warehouse. But at that specific industry and specific business, it was not relevant. So you also have to play those things off in terms of what's important for your company. And that can only happen if you understand the business you're in. You need to understand it, like I said, more than most of your business units.
Absolutely. So well said, and definitely important when it comes to those industry terms that can be super fancy but not have a lot of relevance to what you're trying to achieve as an organization. So, Ridwan, I'm gonna bring you up and ask you to address this question from Sam Graham on LinkedIn. Is it even more dangerous when management thinks that they understand the jargon? And how do you explain that to them as the technical executive? Or understand what that means for the organization.
Yes, so my answer, and I'm sure everybody on the panel is going to agree with what I'm going to say, is most definitely yes. So I used to have this story. I used to call it the brother-in-law syndrome. So I would say, like, your CEO would go. It didn't happen to me, but I heard about it a lot. The CEO, for example, would go with his brother-in-law and play golf, and he would say, "Did you hear about this new thing called machine learning? It's fantastic and it's great and it can do all the things for your business." Then this guy, or he went to some conference or something, he'll come back and he'll force you to, like, why are we not doing that, right? So the same thing. So let's talk about jargon. So the most overly used term is digital transformation. I always say, like, people are trying to sell me a cell phone will use the word digital transformation and try and slip a cell phone in
Sometimes
under.
that is a digital transformation for some people.
I suppose depending on your age, right? It could be digital transformation. But I think it's important to get this right? So I'll give you an example. I was talking to some guys today in Sierra Leone. So it's important to, for example, to say, what is the difference between digital transformation? What's the difference between optimization? You have to get things like that right. If somebody is saying something at the table, and I've been in situations where you sit on, and I'm sure my colleagues will have been there, you sit on a steering committee, they brought some outside professor, and he's starting to talk about some stuff that doesn't make sense in the real world. He's never worked in the private sector. It's important that you nip these things in the bud very early. So to come back to that thing about digital optimization versus transformation, if your board thinks you're doing transformation and the company's doing optimization, you're in a bad space. So it's very important to control that language. So it's not just about the language you use; it's about it's watching the language that they use, and but doing it politely. Obviously, you're not going to say, "Hey, what the hell are you talking about?" But you have to manage that, because if you don't, what you typically see, you seem to be a doctor now, and they run off and bring a CDO, or shadow IT starts to grow. So it's very, very important not just to control your language, or manage your business language, but to manage what they are, what the business is talking about. It's very, very important.
Absolutely. And I'm going to go to Clifford, who is our word specialist, I'll call him. But when we talk about the concept of digital transformation, specifically in that conversation of a CIO, what does that mean when you go in and have that conversation with your business peers?
Yeah, thanks. Great question. It's very simple, but I think extremely important, relevant question, because, and my response is, it's all about digital and not about transformation. And what I mean by that is, you were asking about which technologies one deploys as a CIO, how you make those investment decisions, how you deploy them, what you hope to achieve, what the business impact is of those technologies. We never define those things. All the focus is on digital, and the whole industry is structured to sell us more tech. So I think as CIOs in the modern era, one has to focus more on the transformation. Which part of the business model are we actually trying to influence and enable, and how we will How will we define the success thereof? And who are the business stakeholders that need to make this work? So I don't want to say too much more on it, except that I would absolutely encourage CIOs to unpack the word transformation. What exactly are we trying to transform here? And to Ridwan's point, are we merely optimizing, i.e. are we merely driving more efficient business processes? Because you can do that with legacy ERP. That doesn't have to be a digital transformation program. What are we actually trying to transform and enhance? Or what new capabilities are we looking to launch within the business? So understand the word transformation. It's more important than I'm trying to unpack the word digital, I think. Thanks, Carla.
Absolutely, 100%. So I'm going to bring Peter up because I want to kind of pivot on these same lines of conversation when it comes to digital transformation. Typically, you're going through a digital transformation to provide value to your overall business. However, IT has historically been like a cost center to the organization as opposed to driving value. Can you talk about the transition there? And more importantly, how does the CIO prove that they drive value to the business?
Yeah, so I think that we all understand how cost centers and profit centers work. So basically, as a cost center, you are absorbing costs and you are a cost to the other operations, and you are, deducting your costs from the profits of the organization, basically. So essentially, when you're looking at IT as a cost center, you're operating in that almost back office mode where you're running as a cost center and you are then having your various operational divisions deducting your costs from their potential profitability. So in a case like that, where you've got, whether it's transfer of costs or, whether you just running within your own cost center, the organization is going to feel and see you as eroding their potential margin. Mm-hmm. So what needs to be done to make that transition? You need to understand how you can deliver value. And the value delivery is going to be based on a clear understanding of what that specific division, those internal customers that you are serving, what they need to deliver, what is valuable to them, how they generate their income, and at the same time having a good understanding of your organization's customers. What are the products and the services that your organization is developing and manufacturing and building, and what does the customer expect, and why are the customers buying your products? So essentially, once you understand that side of the operation, you can start translating, as Clifford was saying earlier on, start translating what you are doing in business-based terms, or in terms that your operating divisions can understand. Remember, your operating divisions are delivering the specific products and services to the customers, and the customers are buying those services. And if they don't buy the services, well, you're out of business anyway. So essentially, it's making sure that you understand the terminology being used, but you also understand the metrics that are being used in terms of delivery. So if you have a clearer understanding of what those metrics are, and I think that was also discussed during, Clifford's quality assurance topic earlier on. When you understand exactly what those metrics are, and those metrics are visible to the divisions and the performance of the division, you can then match your IT delivery to the business delivery. So your metrics don't become, I think as Chilafelo was saying, don't become, how many cell phones have you introduced into the organization, but rather how many new customers have got onto your platform, onto your digital platform to do online ordering. Mm-hmm. Because that is something that the organization is looking at. How are you translating the profitability by customer based on the usage on your online platform, rather than how many lines of code have I developed this month? So essentially, I think that it's a mindset shift, and the mindset shift has to be put yourself in the shoes of your internal customers, your divisions, and put yourself in the shoes of your end consumer or customer, and understand what needs to be driven, what the metrics are to get there, and therefore how you're going to contribute to the profitability and the sustainability of your organization.
Wow, very powerful. That was very, very well said. Ghassan, can you build on that as a business advisor when it comes to helping companies or organizations understand how to build value around IT and profitability ROI as opposed to it just being a cost center? How do you create that shift and that change of mindset?
Tyler, actually, to divert a bit from your question, there's a funny story. It's a true story. About 10 years ago, about a decade ago, I went for an interview for a CIO position. And I remember it was in the Emirates Tower in the hotel. And when I went inside, I met the CEO. And as you know, I sat there, I took off my jacket and I opened the laptop and I told him I'd like to start a presentation. And he said, no, let's just talk. And so I said, why do you want me on board? What's your issue? He said, we have a problem. We're having problem with numbers. Finance are giving us numbers, but the sales have different numbers. We want someone to come in as an intern CIO and solve the problem. So the first thing I told him was, so who does this position report to? And he said it reports to the CFO. So without thinking, I just stood up and put on my jacket. And he said, "What are you doing?" I said, "I wish you had told me this before you got me on a first class ticket, because I don't particularly want to report to CFO." He goes, "Why? Convince me." So I sat down and indeed I gave him 3 examples. I told him about innovation. I told him that, being under a CIO, I'll be treated as a cost center, and then things will be contained, and then maybe the ERP would be biased towards finance. So, I started to say a bit of smooth talk to the guy, and he said, "Great, you've convinced you the job. When do we press the button?" And indeed, when I did go to the company about 2 months, 3 months later, and the problem they have was, and I don't want to talk about it in this discussion, was exactly as I anticipated. They had a problem reconciling the transactions that would come from the sales and the inventory that were hitting finance for some setup issues, and that was solved. So he did find the value added there. I just wanted to mention this because I do raise my hat to all CFOs, and I believe without them, we won't get the money we need. But that was one of those spontaneous reactions I made.
Oh,
during
absolutely. Yeah, we experience that a lot in digital transformation, specifically in our client work. Who owns the transformation? Is the COO, the CIO, or the CFO? And a lot of times, if it's the CFO, that can be a difficult conversation to understand the value in that. So I think that that's a great kind of war story. And I'm actually going to bring up Ridwan to kind of talk about the ownership of a digital transformation project and what that looks like as far as who should own it, or what executive stakeholders should be involved.
So I believe this, digital transformation is a team sport, and the ownership starts at the top. It starts with the board, it starts with the exco, and then it rolls down. So I was watching a talk the other day, and the lady made an interesting comment. She said, as soon as you bring a CDO, all they're doing is having somebody to point a finger at when things go wrong. That's how, okay, that makes sense. Yeah, so it's definitely it's a team sport. It doesn't just include IT; it includes the entire organization. So, for example, one of the things that I did when I started my digital transformation journey when I was in healthcare, I was doing my MBA. One of the things I picked up from the research is use this thing called fusion teams. It's just a fancy term for saying don't just make it about IT. Use people from outside of IT as well. So I think it's important that people understand. Even if you have a CDO, it's not his or her sole responsibility. It's a team sport, starting
Mhm.
at all the way down.
Yeah, well said, and well said, and then hard to kind of navigate, right? The additional pieces of how do you share this responsibility as an organization or as an executive team. And so I'm going to bring up Clifford as well, who, obviously you oversee this on a day-to-day basis and understand that dynamic. So can you explain to us, when it comes to digital transformation, what project ownership should look like?
Yes, so I really see that question, Carla, as not dissimilar from who owns the business strategy, because you cannot separate the two. And too often these days, one sees in an organization a business strategy, sometimes, not always, but often some form of a business strategy. One sees a separate IT strategy and increasingly a separate digital transformation strategy, and never show the three meet. And in this day and age, one cannot have that. You have to have it developed, both in terms of its development and the final product. It has to constitute one interdependent strategy in terms of how the organization is going to move forward. And the evidence and justification for that is very clear. If you look at any business strategy in this day and age, and there isn't a significant component or portfolio of technology projects enabling and driving that, something's amiss, because one can do nothing at scale these days without being dependent on technology. So the interdependency and alignment between technology, whether we call that digital transformation or IT, and the business strategy is, those divides have come down. It needs to be one business strategy that clearly articulates how the organization will leverage technology resources and assets to achieve its business goals. There's no such things as separate digital IT business strategies, in my view.
Yeah.
That's interesting. That's very interesting. And Tsholofelo, I kind of want to get your perspective on this as someone who kind of lives within these trenches on a day-to-day basis. How do you see your role as a CIO? Are you just a leader simply of the digital piece, or are you a main executive on the business strategy side?
Yes, I think the most important thing is for us to see ourselves as a business unit, a business unit that can contribute to the revenue of the company. So when you see yourselves like that, then you're not just a technology evangelist, but you are somebody who is championing business objectives and business outcomes. I think a lot of the issues have come from a business partner, maybe a sales department saying, "Hi, Solo, can you digitalize me?" And then they go and sit down, right? They leave you there, come 3 months later and say, "Have you digitalized me?" So we found the hard way that it doesn't work like that. We need to be working together with the business in these types of digitalization projects where he's the champion of the project, but IT is the lead in execution, for example. Where I think one of my sales chiefs wanted a new CRM. It worked very well when he is the champion of the CRM and then IT leads him in the implementation, right? Rather than saying, IT, you go and do this thing, and then come back a couple of months later and say, I don't know what you've done. So what I found works best is where the CIO builds very strong relations with the business, where networking is an important skill to have. Building relationships, being able to have somebody's back and call when there are issues, when there are opportunities for discussions and so on. So I found it works better if us the CIOs are more business savvy and
I think we lost you just there for a quick second. So I'm just going to shift gears here, and I'm going to pull up. Oh, sorry. Are you back? It's always the view of live streaming, right? It sometimes can be glitchy. But with that, I wanna go to you, Peter, to talk about that influence. And I think Tsholofelo's point is so important about the fact of networking within the organization and creating almost a modern IT structure within the CFO's role. How do you as a business leader ensure that you are creating that integration without being able to showcase that impact?
Yes, I think that we've mentioned that the CIO needs to have a relatively broad understanding and contextual understanding of technology, business, the industry they're in, and maybe more of the global market and so on. So when you are engaging with your executive team, there needs to be almost a passion from your side that ties back into each of their specific areas of delivery. And that's a big ask for anybody, because basically we're saying, you know, I've got somebody that's heading retail, I've got somebody that's heading supply chain, I've got somebody that's heading finance, etc., etc. And here I've got the CIO, and this person needs to understand retail, manufacturing, finance, and IT, and marry it all together and start saying, well, how do I get this organization to get onto this track where I am proactive in driving delivery and change? And, there was a great discussion on change management earlier on, and, how you involve change management in your projects and in your business delivery. And I think that that's absolutely critical. But what I'm getting back to is that the unique nature of that person that is in the CIO role. And to me, a large thing here is that, I might be sort of smacked by saying this, but I think a CIO needs to be, to some extent, a selfless person. They cannot be an ego-driven person. And I'm being very stereotypical, but when I'm looking at a CEO role, they generally need to be quite ego-driven, because they need to set the vision and the strategy and get everybody to align and work with them. When you're looking at the CIO, because they need to work with multiple personalities across an organization, they cannot have an overriding ego themselves, because they're going to alienate people. And as soon as you alienate one within the executive team, one bad apple that's sitting in the basket is eventually going to infect the rest. And I think that is almost a mindset and a behavioral approach that CIOs need to adopt, to say, well, how am I going to ensure I can engage successfully with all of these different business leaders, and at the same time get them to understand what I would like to see in terms of using technology and changing this organization and driving this organization down its digital journey, without being seen as, well, hold on, it's all about me. It's not all about me. So I think that, to me, try and get that right, and you'll have a lot more success in your engagements with the executive peer group, and also in being part of that development of the business strategy. And Clifford's point was so important. You have to get your organization to understand that there is one single business strategy. There's no business strategy, technology strategy, and digital strategy. And data strategy is the new one that's coming along now as well. It has to be integrated into one overall business strategy.
That's very, very well said, most certainly. And I want to go to Ghassan specifically and kind of build off of what Peter said in a specific digital transformation lens, or any sort of technology implementation, or even an optimization, as all of those different pieces that fall into there. How that within that project governance do you ensure that interoperability throughout the organization and collaboration is taking place?
Wow. I wanted to add to Peter's. Yes, you got to have a humble CIO with all the pressures, and avoid the egos, because not only is the CIO worried about the digital transformation, and now with the introduction of all the cyber threats, which was ever increasing exponentially as well. So I wish us all the best. On the governance side, Kyler, is what I've noticed is there has to be some formal governance in place that's kind of cross-functional, because a lot of organizations, and I'm talking maybe in the Middle East, there tends to be a lot of IT shadowing that's going on, where a lot of end users tend to bypass IT because maybe of the weak governance model that they have. And then, this creates a big issue in terms of security and destroys the whole strategy that Pete's been talking about. So I think to achieve a good governance model, that has to be uh, done with the executives within all departments, and it has to be cross-functional decision making for the investment opportunities. I see weaknesses in that, and then that has to be implemented, and in order to go beyond. But without a strong governance model, I think we're doomed to having shadowing ITs and misalignments along the way.
Absolutely. Yeah, project governance is something that, we really hone in on to make sure our clients are effectively optimized for success. So within our last couple minutes here, I want to kind of do a round robin when it comes to if you were talking to a CIO right now, or even a CIO that's coming up within the ranks, what would be one piece of advice that you would give them? And I'm actually going to start with you, Josholofela, if you don't mind, since you're in that role, to kind of take us through what your piece of advice would be.
Yeah. If I give one piece of advice, it would be to start dressing up, putting on a suit.
I was just
Uh,
about to say, when you become a consultant, you don't have to wear a tie. It's going to be great.
yes, it's a little trick that I use. It's a little trick that I use to remind me that I'm part of the business. I think that's one big piece of advice, to say you are part of the business. You're not a cost center. You need to start thinking as a somebody who contributes to the business. And as Peter and Clifford had said, part of the business strategy, you must see yourselves as part of that. And that, to me, is one piece of advice I would give. Start wearing your business tie.
I love it. I'm going to put my tie on after this. All right, Gassan, I'm going to you.
Yeah, one piece of advice, I would ask that CIO to revisit his SWOT analysis of himself, and be really honest and humble about his weaknesses, and of course identify the strengths. Because what you want to do is you want to look at those weaknesses that you have, whether you're a techno savvy guy and you're not a people's person and you want to get inside, and you want to start building on that, so you can start gaining trust, and building, cultivating the network within the organization. Again, I go back to the issue: do a PR, be a people's person, and start meeting with people. Let them trust you. People will buy from you if they like you, they know you, and they trust you. And you need to do that. That's my tip
Know
on
you
it.
and trust. Yeah, absolutely. Be a people's person. Be fun. Bring the fun. Right, Peter?
Yeah.
What would you give your advice for a CIO?
Okay, so I think that I'm going to open this up by saying that we are living in extraordinary times, and we are extremely lucky to be living at this specific point in time, and that we are able to contribute to organizational change and business change because of the roles that we're in. Customer behaviors and preferences are changing. Change is becoming exponential. It's becoming quick. We need to be able to pivot quickly. We need to use things like scenario planning rather than, long-term, the previous way of doing strategies. We need to delayer complexity. We live in complex times, and as things become more exponential, things will become more complicated. But you need to delayer the complexity. And I think in doing those things, we can become extraordinary people.
Wow, Peter,
Yeah.
I'm just going to call you every morning because you just eat, sleep, and breathe inspiration. Just the energy. I absolutely love it. So, Ridwan, what's your advice for the modern CIO?
So it's interesting if you build on that series that we did, Kyla, and if you listen to the CIOs and current CIOs today, it's that message that I keep pushing, all right? It's not just about the technology. You need to understand the technology, but it's about the soft skills, it's the people skills. Hassan made a very interesting point there about selling. I always said what made me good as a CIO was the ability to go into a boardroom and get what I want. Those are very, very key traits to have. So it's I would say to an up and coming CIO, somebody who wants to get into the space, yes, do the technology stuff, but don't deep dive too much unless you want to be a specialist. If you want to move into the CIO space, start looking more at business stuff. Do like things like MBAs and also the soft skills. And let's not underestimate things like doing public speaking courses. We could all benefit from doing refreshers in that. And the ability to read a room. And what's interesting now is they're saying leaders should have empathy, especially after COVID. We never spoke about these soft skills and things. So I would say, yeah, and keep that at the front of your mind that as you studying and learning about technology, also learn about how to manage and work with and influence other people.
Well said. Definitely very powerful. And lastly, we'll end with Clifford, who talks a lot about the role of the CIO as our leader on the EMEA side. So Clifford, what is your advice to a modern CIO?
My advice is very simple, Kyla. I think CIOs, especially those that have been in their positions for a long time, need to continuously ask themselves the question, if your company was hiring a CIO today, would they still hire you? I think it's an important question.
Oh man, you guys, that last, I have chills. I have chills going up my spine. So thank you so much for this unbelievable insight. We all learned a lot. The audience learned a lot. Our community, our client community here learned a lot from you, and we're so very grateful for your time and insight. If you'd like to, go ahead and drop your LinkedIn profile into our LinkedIn event chat if you'd like to connect with our community. And I'm sure Eric, as he's been reaching out via our chat feature, will be inviting a lot of you on our live streams that we host every Tuesday to stay, in touch with the community. But thank you so much for your time. And with that, we are going to close out our first ever EMEA Digital Stratosphere event. It's been such a wonderful day with our wonderful audience, our very knowledgeable keynote speakers. And I'll let Clifford close it out. I will give you just some of the logistics. Just a reminder, this recording will be available via Third Stage Consulting YouTube. I'll also reach out to all of the attendees with a link so that you have that information readily available. I highly recommend you share with colleagues or your network as well. We always appreciate that amplification. And then also remember that if you do want to have these conversations, the reason we all work at Third Stage is because we're passionate about technology and how it influences a positive business strategy. Feel free to reach out. We're happy to chat with you. Clifford, Ridwan, Dom, Donia, they all are on our EMEA team and help bring value through technology to our clients. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to Clifford for closing. Thank you so much. It's always an honor to host you today. And with that, Clifford, bring us home.
Fantastic. Yeah, it's been a fantastic day. Thank you so much, Carla. And let me also say thank you to you. We know that it's the middle of the night for you. It's been a long session. So
the
really
sun's
do
up
appreciate
now. So
yeah, really do appreciate the role you've played and helping us out. And also thank you to the other colleagues in America who've had to get up in the middle of the night. So it's been fantastic. And to everybody that's dialed in and shared and asked questions and probed and prodded and kept us on our toes. I've thoroughly enjoyed it, and I'm sure I speak on behalf of all my colleagues when I say that we've really enjoyed the interaction. It is a great privilege. I think someone made the point earlier, but it's absolutely a great privilege to be able to engage on these topics and engage with so many different perspectives and viewpoints from the different regions within EMEA. So thank you again for those contributions and questions, and let's please keep engaging. Feel free to contact us going forward. We do enjoy hearing your issues and challenges. It kind of keeps us up to date as to what's happening in the market. So thank you very much. It's been a great session, Carla, and to the team, all the best.
All right, signing off from EMEA. Thank you so much, everyone.